So to start with, just a few dates. Now Pascal has been with us for quite some time, from the 70s actually, and it did have a rather fast start because it was quite the ideal language to actually teach programming. In fact, that's what it was first applied to. And one thing brought another, and as you see, there was quite soon an Object Pascal version. I seem to remember it was actually called Clascal in Pascal with classes, that is in some environments. Then there was even an extension to this object-oriented Pascal thing, and then on 1995 or perhaps 1994, I will not claim to be exact, Delphi, which was actually quite important afterwards, was released. So that's the actual the Pascal programming language, so to speak, although it was actually called Pascal User Manual and Report. That's the book we all started with at the time. And I must say it was quite formal, and sometimes it wasn't all that easy to use. But then, well, such is life. Now, I'd like to mention a few, I'm going fast, yes, I know, I've got about 10 minutes. Some Pascal compilers, but as I'll say here later, do have a look at some pages I'll mention later. I'd like to mention a few, just a few. UCSD Pascal, which was a funny thing because it was a 16-bit machine running on 8 bits, meaning that was bloody slow, but it did work. And in fact, it allowed us to use a tiny, I mean 48K, not megabytes, K machine, right? And it did work with Pascal, and in fact with Fortran. I did use that, and it was quite useful. And there was all sorts of Pascals. I've tried to mention perhaps the most meaningful. There was a Microsoft Pascal indeed, and a Mac Pascal, of course, followed by the Macintosh Programs Workshop, more about that later. There was a MeterWorks Pascal, Code Warrior, it was called, in which I was quite heavily involved. There was an IBM Pascal, Turbo Pascal, then Borland, then Delphi, then lately, later, of course, Lazarus. So those are just a few, and as I say here, do have a look at this webpage, which I'll mention later, which is called Pascal Land, and it will mention a ton of compilers which do show that Pascal is alive and well nowadays. Now that looks an old book, indeed it is. It's mine, and it's destroyed. Poor thing. It's been much used, much used. It's been used as a doorstop too, at times, and it has been, if I'm not wrong, at least twice thrown out of a window, right? So I did use Pascal at the time, yeah. Now this is the back page of, I think it's Byte, and I'd like to call your attention to the actual fact of the pricing. That was $50. It was cheap enough for all of us to use, and that was a big advantage, right? And well, I think I've had all sorts of Turbo Pascal things from the first to the last, both in Windows, of course, and in Mac OS, as I've just shown. And one thing I'd like to say is that these compilers and indeed the software are by no means dead. Meaning, let's see if I can get this to work, meaning that I've actually been able to run the software inside the browser, and it works. That's a few days ago. So everything that you quite possibly remember is still alive and well. Indeed, it can be downloaded, and either you can run it, as you see, on the screen, or you can actually download it at home and do things with it. I must confess I've not tried to install Windows 95 or so on an actual virtual machine, but it might work, and it will be, of course, blazingly fast. In fact, when I get to finish this thing, when I finish writing this thing, you'll see that compilation was instant at the time. And I beg you to remember that in those computers, it was not unusual to actually work with about half a megabyte of RAM. So you were tight indeed. And you had to fight for every byte, and if you wanted to actually write some sort of long list, you had to do it in 2 bits, and swap it to disk, all sorts of slow procedures, but it did work. So now that's ready. You'll see the flash of compilation. That's it. And then I'll run it, again a flash, and I'll have to call up the text window, and there it is, hello world IPC. So indeed, this is alive and well, it's working. Now, same thing goes for good old Mike Pascal. I did have this poster, and I know what you're thinking, that's a tiny language. It was at the time. It was. Not nowadays. It's something quite much bigger. But this poster was actually useful because you could have it on the wall and then look at it, and you didn't have to use the book, the manual, whatever, right? So I did have that one. I wonder what it is now. And again, I've been able to actually run this thing nowadays by means of, it'll take about half an hour to boot, but it does work. So indeed, I can run macOS 9 on a browser, which speaks volumes about the power of today's machines. I do remember firing some sort of calculation and then going home to eat, and then turning back, and there was a mistake. Right, so fast it wasn't, but here it is. And indeed, it did do quite a few things. So that's Think Pascal, one of the latest versions. And as you'll see, I'm actually able to create a project and type something, some simple instructions, and run it. This is running, as I say, on a browser today. So the good news is that all that we remember, all those interesting times we had, are still alive and well, and if we want to make use of them, they're here. So let me just go on because time flies. Now that's Quick Pascal, Microsoft Quick Pascal, and again, it's actually up and running. So if I click here, I will not show all of the program, but this was just a test to show how I think its insertion sorting is carried out. It's quite visible, it's very visual, of course. See it? And it does work, I will not say fast, but it does show what things were like. I'd like to say that I made use of all of these instruments at the time. And I think my students were thankful for it because it did show them the way to build good structured programs. More about that later. So I won't see all of it. This was good old Macintosh Programmers Workshop. And if you look at it carefully, you'll see the Unix background in it. We didn't quite know what was in store for us at the time. That's MeterWorks Pascal, in which, as I say, I was involved. Indeed, I did translate this book into Spanish as well as a compiler. It looked like that. So, what was my experience very quickly like? I started with Pascal, then I went into C, C++, Objective-C, Java, and lately Swift. So, along these years, with some excursions into BASIC, for instance, more about that later, I've used all of these languages, and the changes have been monumental. But I've never forgotten Pascal, of course not. So these are a couple of important web pages, Pascal Land, as I've said before, and this is the place where, for instance, you can download all of the books without copyright, of course, by Dr. Birch. And today's Pascal, well, I'll say nothing because I'm quite sure my colleagues will have more to say about that. One of them, of course, is Delphi, which is possibly the spear point of Pascal at this time. And the other one is an open version of Pascal, Free Pascal, with its environment Lazarus. Again, I'll say nothing about this because my colleagues will say more about that. Now, if someone, for some reason, does not have exactly at hand the contents of the Congress, here it is on this page, right? And that's about it. I've been too brief, but I don't think I've managed to give a taste of what things were like. Thank you very much.